Why are people paying so much money for old A-format horror paperbacks from the 70s and 80s? There's going to be more to this video than that. There'll be a book haul, there's going to be some SF, some fantasy, some horror. But I want to sort of answer that question because my friend Jules Burt, he does videos probably every couple of months where he looks at prices online of vintage paperbacks on eBay and what people are paying, what people are asking. And it's no secret that this book in front of us, Paperbacks from Hell, published by Quirk, by Grady Hendrix, the horror novelist who's been quite successful in recent years, is the reason why. People want this stuff anyway, and this is a really great book which has been up several years now. I sell it in work, looking at the legacy of old A-format horror in the UK and the States, and it's really good. It's got lots of great pictures in it and lots of colour, and of course because he's a novelist he's got a good narrative sense, and there's some interesting stuff about American publishing and book selling which I really like, and it sort of meshes with things which I saw in the book trade as well, particularly in the 1980s, so you learn a lot about it. There are some differences between the way things went in the UK and the US, but probably the same. So this is why it's happening. Now Valancourt Books, very wonderful US publisher who are real Anglophiles, they do a Paperbacks from Hell series, and they do about a dozen of the books featured in here in A format. 10 of them are available in the UK. 2 of the ones by Lisa Tuttle are not, because clearly the copyrights are still held by a UK publisher. Not they've been in print from that UK publisher for many years. Lisa has a book coming out in NYRB Classics later this year, My Death, which was originally a PS limited edition novella, so that's great news for her. Of course, if you go online, because Amazon and the like break the international territory copyright rules, you'll get them from there. So I got them from there. But anyway, this is the reason why people are paying so much for paperback horror, because they've seen it in here. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to unbox some vintage horror I've bought and talk a bit more about this phenomenon. But we'll do some other things as well. So just to sort of lead that on, I've just been into like my local town, Bath, and I bought this, The War in Heaven by Charles Williams, from the Dennis Weekly Library of the Occult. So this is a Sphere paperback from the 70s. And this was $4.99. I don't normally pay that much for a vintage paperback, but you don't see Williams' stuff very much. He was one of the Inklings, the one nobody talks about ever, besides Tolkien and Lewis. And he sort of wrote these occult thrillers, and there is one in my book 100 must-read fantasy novels. I can't think for the life of me which one I put in. I've not read him for years, and even in the 80s he was an obscure figure, and these days he's really obscure, but he's sort of worth looking at, sort of a Christian, sort of occultist figure, very interesting. So I picked that up. Also, I've been listening to and watching the congressional hearings on UAPs the last couple of days, which have been broadcast live. You can see them on YouTube, and weirdly enough, I've been rereading some Barry N. Malzberg, and I decided to pick up this book, Revelations, which is one of his paranoid astronaut books. This is the third one of the 3, and this is the very wonderful Anti-Oedipus Press edition, which has got a fantastic introduction by D. Harlan Wilson, who pretty much sums up the way I feel about SF at the moment. And I reread this last night because I do have a first of it, which is a little A format paperback. And, you know, 160 pages, wonderful. I read it in one sitting. It's great to go with that again. Because, of course, the thing is, Malzberg with these books, this is another one of them, The Falling Astronauts, which was, I think, the second one. The first one was Beyond Apollo. This is the early 70s as the space program was ending. And Malzberg was incensed, really, at the way that the US government used the space program to detract from what was happening in Vietnam and about the corruption of that. And yeah, it's sort of great stuff. So I decided to get this one as well, even though I've got an old Arrow one, because I think AOP are doing a great job. They really are. My good friend James Wright, the novelist, he did an introduction for their edition of Beyond Apollo, which I think is still available, which I don't have because I've got other editions. I've got 2 other editions. I must get that. He did a good introduction in that. And I introduced James to Malmesbury, led to a copy of Guernica Night 25 years ago. So there you go. So I am looking at, you know, the whole astronaut thing when we're about to go into space again. There's all this talk about it. And, you know, and yet the aliens might be out there. So that's in the back of my mind as well. But looking back onto the horror thing, people paying lots of money for horror. So I'm going to dig a bit of horror out now and show you what you can get. Really, because I think it's okay paying out for stuff if it's good, but people are paying silly money for things which are not in great nick. I'm just going to zoom the camera down there. And one of my favourite writers is somebody who's done a lot of horror in her time, and that's a writer called Quinn Yarbro. I've mentioned her a few times on the channel, and what I've got here, I've got a couple of 4 books by her, which I bought from a dealer who is one of my favourite dealers, simply because I find him really attentive, and also really it's because his books are so fantastic, and he's a great guy. We're talking about fine edition books of Greenhithe. Thanks, Mike, for these. I'm just going to zip these out and show them to you. Now, there are 4 titles here by Yarbro, and 2 of them are horror novels, so I'm going to show you the quality of what I've got here. Now, really, when you see people paying, you know, silly money, and you're talking nearly telephone numbers, you're talking about tens of pounds or dollars or hundreds, 100 plus for really ratty old paperbacks. Now, if something's really uncommon and you just want to read it, and it's a generally rare book, I mean, if you can afford it, that's absolutely fine. But there's no need to pay really stupid money. So really, these books here, I mean, there are probably people out there looking for some of these and paying daft money, and they're completely beat up. They're sort of acceptable. It's like the lowest grade on eBay, and what we would call that poor in sort of proper book collecting terms. So let's have a look. So here's one. This is Beast Nights, as you can see. And yeah, that looks like a werewolf novel. And I think you'll agree that this is very handsome. Look at that. It's like new. Okay. Really, really marvellous. Now, I've never seen this book before. Now, Yarbro has a massive, massive big book. That's from 1989. Okay? Right? Now, you won't get many copies like that because this dealer knows how to curate. He's bought this stuff. He's kept it properly. It's posted, you know, with really good packaging and what have you. So, look at that. Now, fundamentally, these horror books I'm going to show you cost me about 20 quid a pop. Okay, so it's not cheap, but when you look at the quality of what people are paying for, genuinely uncommon books. Now, you may be able to get these individual titles more cheaply in a beat up condition, but my main point is about what people are paying for horror per se. I'm going to show you another one now. This obviously will remind people of Stephen King's Firestarter. This is Fire Code by Yarbro. Never buy a book with gold letter on the cover. That's what we used to say in bookselling in the 80s. Nice chunky thing. Look at that. And that's really nice. Popular library horror. And let's see. Obviously, these are US titles. Let's see when this comes from. Again, that's 87. So to put that into context, this book is 36 years old. Okay? Now, if you pay 20 quid for something which is 36 years old and is pristine, I think that's okay. But, you know, if you're paying a lot more money for something which is in a state, you know, if you can afford it, that's absolutely fine. But do think and do hunt and look around. If you're going to spend a lot of money on books, at least try and get some in decent quality, you know. Learn to search. Be more expansive in your searching. Don't go for the first thing. I see people buying stuff all the time at silly prices when they don't have to. You just need to take your time and look and not be too impulsive. So, Chelsea, as I say, I'm a big fan of her work, so I'm really pleased to get those. Never seen them before. I've read about probably between 30 and 40 of her books. I haven't counted for a while. She's written lots of horror novels. And I've also got here some fantasy. A Baroque fable. Look at that. Isn't that absolutely gorgeous? Lovely. Excellent. Okay. Super. And I've never seen this one before either. Now, this is out there. There are cheaper copies out there. But in this condition, uncommon. Gorgeous. And finally, this is one I'd heard of. The other ones I wasn't familiar with. I have glanced over the bibliography, but when somebody's written 100 books and you're gradually working your way through them, you don't take it all in, you know, especially if, as a bookseller, if they're not available, I don't really put them in my memory banks unless I want them. So this is To the High Redoubt, which I love that title, really good. And yeah, look at that. This is quality. And that's not, the text block isn't aged there. That's the colour that was toned by the publisher, yellow, rather like Door used to do their thing. So yeah, look at that. Excellent. And this is fantasy horror, supernatural fantasy. Horror, of course, isn't a genre. Some of it is crime because it could happen. Some of it is SF because it's technologically based. And some of it is fantasy because it's supernaturally based. But there, look at that. So that's like a crossover there between fantasy and horror in sort of commercial genre terms. To the High Redoubt. Love that title. So that just goes to show that you can really get decent condition books, you know, decent prices, not too expensive. They weren't really cheap, but if you think that if you bought these new now, they'd be in B format, they would be in the UK $7.99 if you're lucky, more likely $8.99, $9.99. So if it costs you 20 quid for a book like this, then you are really talking that, you know, and they've been, it's very old books, so they've been looked after beautifully. So I don't think any collector minds paying out when, you know, it's good stuff and it's good quality. I'm just going to stick the Charles Williams on the top there. So we'll see what else I've got. The rest is SF. So for those of you who are used to the channel where we don't just do SF, we do all sorts of things, including travel videos, which nobody watches, and you should, because I often talk about books in them. We'll move on to some SF now. So I guess this is a kind of book haul, and show you what I've got. So that whole UAP thing is fascinating. It's really interesting. So the truth is out there, as they say. And if you haven't watched any of it on YouTube, do, because it's really fascinating stuff, you know, congressional hearings about UAPs, and they're bipartisan, all parties involved. Fascinating stuff. So I'm going to just pop some more things down here, and then we'll take a look at what they are. And the focus really of this haul is on pristine quality vintage paperbacks. There's going to be some magazines as well, so we'll have a look at what we've got here. And somebody who I really, really like, but I've neglected in my collecting for a very long time. And a lot of his books never had much of a publication thing in the UK, aside from the early ones. That's Norman Spinrad, one of the kings of the New Wave. And Norman lives in France, and he's, you know, advanced in years now. And I'd really like to go over and interview him. So, you know, maybe I'll ask him. I've met him once at the WorldCon 87. Great guy. So I've got some Spinrad here, and this is A World Between. Now, A World Between, when you see it, is usually in a state. Look at that. Absolutely gorgeous. From pocket. Isn't that beautiful? And again, the yellow tone text block. That's the way it was produced at the time. There we go. And this is about gender, identity politics. So there you go. So that's going to be an interesting one. And Norman once said that every ism ended up as fascism. So we'll find out. Again, this is an 80s book, I think. Let's just check. I think it's late 70s. First printing October 79. So there you go, first printing. Absolutely stunning. I think you'll agree. That's what it's all about for the Outlaw Bookseller. It's about quality. And I'm doing a lot of upgrading these days. I'm selling reading copies on. I'm having a good time with it. And that's why there's been a lot of book hauls on the channel recently. So I've been selling. I sold a load of stuff at A&Y. And I was sort of emailing with Moyd the other day, Media Death Cult. I'm sure you know Media Death Cult. And we were discussing, you know, moving stuff on because we've got too many books and where's the best place to sell things. So best of luck to Moyd with that, and gave him a few pointers, and we had a little chat, which was really nice. So there you go, because, you know, you end up with so much stuff, don't you? What else have we got? Well, is this another Spinrad? I've got another Spinrad here, and this is Mind Game, which is about cults. and cultism. I'm just going to adjust the camera because whatever I do here, we get glare. But I decided to go high def today because we're getting such nice stuff. Just bear with me and we'll have a look at what we get. Yes, so that's Mind Game. Absolutely gorgeous. And this really, for a moment, I thought this was an alternative version, a VT, a variant title of his book, The Children of Hamelin, which was published in hardcover late 80s, early 90s. And did I get the Worldcon? I think it was after. And that was a book which was suppressed for years. And this is about cults, and it's a sort of similar thing. Again, we have the yellow text block. Now, you're a modern person, you're used to modernity. You can probably hear things outside behind me. I've got the windows open because it's boiling on you, so I do apologise if there's any noise. Isn't that gorgeous? And, you know, Norman, he's sort of very fierce, you know, he would always attack those sort of things. And it goes right the way back, of course, to Bug Jack Barron, his famous New Wave novel, where, you know, it's about corruption, organ farming, reality TV, and Revelations by Barry Marsberg is like that as well. And Barry notes in one of the two afterwards in this that, of course, Paddy Chayefsky must have been watching, even though that book sank without trace, because a few years later he did Network, which is a very similar thing to both Bug Jack Barron and Revelations. So there you go. But yeah, great. So that's very uncommon. I don't think I've ever seen one, and certainly not in that condition. So I'm filling my Norman gaps, which is great. It really is. Anthology action. We like a bit of anthology action here. Now, one of the most noted anthology series of the 1970s was Robert Silverberg's New Dimensions, which ran to at least a dozen volumes. Some of them were Gollancz hardcovers in the UK. This is the best of New Dimensions from Pocket Books. Look at that. Absolutely stunning. Again, the yellow text block. Gorgeous. Let me just pick this up and we'll go handheld. I think you'd agree. That's really stunning, isn't it? Absolutely lovely. This is the standard. And I do love collecting anthologies. So there's some great stuff in this. If we look at the back again, it mentions the Sliced Crosswise Only on Tuesday World, which is the original short novella version of Day World, which was expanded into a trilogy in the 80s. Felix Gottschalk wrote the Tier 3000, growing up in Tier 3000, something like that, which was an Ace Special from the second Ace Special series. And there were 3 series of Ace Specials. In a previous video, I said that I thought Donald A. Wollheim edited the first one. It wasn't. It was Terry Carr. The second series, I'm not sure who edited them. And those are the ones I'm collecting at the moment because they're a mixed bag, but I do like their liveries. And the Gottschalk is one of them, and I've had it for ages. So, and there's a R.A. Lafferty in here, Ellison Lagan, Doswar, Tiptree Jr., Joanna S., Gregory Benford, and many more. So that's going to be spiffing stuff. I'm actually reading New Dimensions 1 at the moment, and I have to say I'm finding it a very, very mixed bag. But that, you know, is the nature of the beast with anthologies. They're a good way of testing things out, but they don't always hit a nail on the head the first time. And for such an acclaimed anthology series, well, the jury's out at the moment, so we'll see. I'll review that on the channel. So I'm very, very pleased with that. We'll just pop that there. We've got 4 more paperbacks to go and some magazines today as well. I don't really buy magazines very often, but we'll come back to that. So we've got another tranche to look at here, so I'll let you feast your eyes on those. So yes, the Paperbacks from Hell is why you're seeing silly money. So if you've got lots of old horror paperbacks, you might be able to clean up. I mean, they do have a real charm, don't they? You know, the old sort of 70s and 80s ones when things were lurid and politically incorrect. So, you know, they were great times in publishing. You know, there's still lots of exploitation publishing going on. There's still exploitation publishing now, but of a different kind. And I want to talk about that another time, but it's not as exciting. So I got a little stash of things here. So we take a look at those now. What have we got? Well, first of all, I bought this because I love the cover. And I am a sucker for science fiction novels with prehistoric animals on the cover. I did have some I got rid of because it's too easy to end up with loads of rip-offs of Ray Bradbury's Sound of Thunder. But look at this. This is gorgeous. This has got Please Your Soul on the cover. This is Love Not Human by Gordon R. Dixon. which I think you'll agree is spectacular. Isn't that lovely? And yeah, really, really nice, interesting colour back and spine. They're very light yellow, and that's Ace. Absolutely gorgeous. This is, I believe, a collection of short stories, and I think one of them obviously is about Loch Ness, and I imagine this is it. So we'll just have a look. And it says, all the faces of love, joyous, tender, bittersweet, and inhuman. So we shall see, I guess. And when is this date from? Let's have a quick shifty inside. It's got Black Charlie in there. That's a good story. That's in 100 Years of Science Fiction. From 1954. I just said it was later. So let's have a look. February 1981, Ace, first printing, number line there. And it's worth mentioning, you notice I say first printing, I don't say first edition. Edition refers to content, okay? Content. Most novels and most collections of short stories remain in their first edition no matter what printing it is, because they only become revised editions when the content is changed. That's when they become a second edition. So collectors, we're all doing it wrong. We should be saying, if we collect firsts, and you notice I just say this is a first a lot, what we mean is a first printing or first impression. Two terms are interchangeable. A first edition is a different thing, okay? So you'll see the number line there. Number line's got the 1 in it. Doesn't matter where the 1 is. So that's the first printing because the 1 is there. Not because it says that there, but because there's a 1 in it. Okay, there you go. And I think you'll agree that's really spiffing, isn't it? Really, really nice. Excellent stuff. Really beautiful. I am bagging books more now, and I think some of these are going to go back into bags and remain bagged. So there we are. Anthology Action Strikes Back. What have we got here? An analog book. The Best of Astounding, edited by Tony Lewis. New name to me, Tony Lewis. Sounds British. Series editor Ben Bova. And he is 5-time winner of the Hugo Award for Best Editor of the Year. Wow. And I bet that's in the 80s. Bova was really big in the 80s. Quite a guy. He once dropped into a bookshop I was working in, but I was actually away at the Worldcon, and he was in Britain at the Worldcon, and I didn't get to meet him. Not that I was that bothered. I'd never really been interested in his stuff, if I'm quite honest. So this is 1978. Frederick Brown, Chris Neville, I like Chris Neville, Lewis Paget, which is Henry Kuttner, H.B. Piper, who of course shot himself in the 60s, very sad, Sturgeon, John Pierce, I don't recognise the top of my head. So there we go. So analog, of course, Astounding, became analog later on. There we go. Right, very, very nice indeed. I think you'll agree. Isn't that absolutely stunning? Yeah. And this does have a... Now, the text block on that is interesting. Yeah, that's a mild yellow. That's probably faded a bit in time. So there you go. That's that. Right, we were talking about Ace Specials, second series from the mid-70s. I'm going to show you one now. They are really mixed bags, these things. And I've just been in touch with another dealer I know to ask him what he's got. And I am thinking of going for the lot. I think there's about 12 of them. There's one author I normally wouldn't go for, and that's Marion Zimmer Bradley, who's a bit like reading Catherine Cookson in Space, you know, and the Caffrey's like that as well. But this is an interesting one. This is Challenge the Hellmaker by Walt and Lee Richmond, and this is number 6. They've all got this sun motif there, and this interesting typeface, and very sort of Skiffy-esque covers. I think you'd agree. Challenge the Hellmaker. The title did that for me, quite frankly. It really did. That's a great title. A great title goes a long way as far as I'm concerned. And as science fiction is about opening the mind up and bringing on the sense of wonder, the sublime, the conceptual breakthrough, a title's a starting point, really, isn't it? You know, and it can be subtle, but you put something like that and it really makes you think. So it's an intriguing new novel. Well, it was new in this mid-70s, by a husband and wife team as scientists. And they've been absent from the SFO for too long, apparently. So there we are. So it's a dystopia. Wow. Okay, that looks great. Challenge the Hellmaker. So I am thinking of getting all of these. And if I do, and when I do, I'll do a thematic video. Isn't that nice? Really nice. It's kind of perverse. The original 60s Ace Specials, just, oh, they were big series. and some real landmark books. Much fewer landmark books in the mid-70s, and in the 80s there were some landmark ones, things like Kim Stanley Robinson and William Gibson, Lucius Shepard, really good stuff, and lots of other things that fell by the wayside. They're more conventional, but the mid-70s ones, they're slightly quirkier, and I am at that stage in my sort of historianship of SF where I'm digging into those little obscure corners and finding these things. Okay, well, the next book from this trance was meant to be another Spinrad, and the dealer I got these from, he did have in his listings a copy of Star Spangled Future, which is a book by Norman that you always see in a total mess. And I've always refused to buy it. I want one, you know, which is at least decent looking. It doesn't have to be mint, but sadly he'd sold it. And instead I said, well, send me this instead. Now this is really beautiful. You don't see these very much in the UK. They're far more common in the US, and even then they're quite hard to find. This is Stanislaw Lem. I have read this book a long time ago, and this is Memoirs Found in a Bathtub. And this is the Avon edition. Absolutely lovely. Look at that. The blue, the yellow, the red, the orange, they just pop and spin and leap off the page. And look at that. Gorgeous. Absolutely stunning. One day, all paperbacks will revert to being this. And a red text block, toned text block. Absolutely gorgeous. Fantastic. Lovely. You really cannot argue with that. And I've not read this for years. I do like Lem. I'm a big fan. Solaris, of course, is the famous one. And there's more Lem in print now than there has been, gosh, for ages. MIT do some beautiful ones. I did a video about Lem last year because they're called The Problem of Knowledge. And I reviewed a few of the recent MIT issues, paperbacks, hardcovers. Really great. And I'm really pleased with that. That's absolutely stunning. Pristine quality. Look at that. Not a mark on it. Gorgeous. Yeah, I really like Avon paperbacks in this period, actually. One of my favourites is the Cornelius Chronicles in A format, which is the first 4 Jerry Cornelius books by Michael Moorcock in it, which is lovely, and I've got one. And I've kept that bagged. I really love that. It's great stuff. So there you go. So we'll have a look now. I think we're going to move on to some magazines. That'll be interesting. I say magazines, but I've got one more book here, actually. So I'm just going to pop that out, and we'll see. And I've popped in the background there, you can see one of the Stark House editions of Barry Marsberg's Lone Wolf series, which he wrote as Mike Barry. I would love those in the original A format. There were 14 of them. They're Don Pendleton executioner type things, except of course they're far more interesting because Barry's a much better writer. And he did 14 of them, and he wrote like about 10 in a year. You know, he's just like a machine, that man. And sort of drug vengeance things, great fun. And I've never read them, and they've just issued some more in the UK, so I must get the rest. And I will burn through them. They're not his usual high literary standard, but they're still really good. So I'm enjoying Night Raider at the moment. So that's something that's happening. So what have I got here? This is bagged up nice and safely. This is a real sort of golden age classic. Now, not a golden age book, but a cardboard there. How exciting! But a classic novel from the golden age, you know, and well, story collection really. It's not a novel. There's 2 stories in the sequence which give the book's name, and this is The Cloak of Aesir by John W. Campbell Jr., who of course was the editor of Astounding, which later became an analogue, and the man who shaped the standards in the golden age and ushered in the golden age and stopped the hack writers from coming in and, you know, redeveloped what the idea of the science fiction writer was in a genre sense. And this is Hyperion paperback, Cloak of Aesir. I do have Cloak of Aesir in another collection. I love that title. Of course, it refers to Norse mythology. And there's interesting connections between Norse mythology and SF. Because, of course, when you think of the people who used to write sword and sorcery in the 30s, 40s, 50s, very often they were writing things for the companion magazines. Like, for example, when Campbell was editing Astounding, they also had Unknown on the site, and Unknown is where the fantasy stuff was. And, you know, these were jobbing writers not making a lot of money. So they would do these fantasy things. And occasionally they would do science fantasy things where there were sort of quasi-scientific explanations and get-out clauses for the fantasy. And that really is how the 2 things became linked. And, you know, Weird Tales did a bit of SF, bit of fantasy, bit of horror. And as I said, the interchangeability of the genres, as they weren't solid, because of course horror, as I say, is not a genre. You know, some of it's crime, some of it's SF, some of it's supernatural fantasy. So yeah, so that's an interesting one. Large format, all sorts of things in this series. You don't see these very often. Looking on the back, there's all sorts of obscurities on there. There's famous books like A. Merritt's The Metal Monster, and there's a Carol Capek book here called The Absolute Large. Wow, I guess that's short stories. Ray Cummings, Garrett P. Service, Stanley G. Wyborn, Philip Wiley's Gladiator, and there's another second series. Wow, these are great, very, very nice. I do like very plain liveries. And this one's quite old as well. Let's have a look. What date is this? This is from 1976. Wow, can't get over that. 76. Who'd have thunk it? So that's that. We're going to do some magazines now, as I say. Shift that there. I do apologise for the glare. It's almost completely unavoidable in this house, whatever I do. I guess I need some bizarre camera mount that looks down on things from above. So I'm going to zip down there and we'll have a look at some mags. As ever on this channel, it's more about the content than the presentation, because technically I am a klutz, so I hold my hands up. I don't have a lot of patience for that sort of stuff. Maybe one day I'll get it together. I'm sure you find it very frustrating. So we're going to have a look at some mags now. I don't often do magazines. And what have we got? Well, let's go right back to the beginning. What was the first science fiction magazine, the one that used the term science fiction? Well, it was Gernsback, of course. And what we've got here is, let's see, we have Amazing. Okay, Amazing was pretty much the SF magazine back in 25-26 when the term was coined. Science fiction first, then a fan wrote in and said, why not science fiction? Typical of Gernsback to have a jawbreaker. And this is the 50th anniversary edition. Look at that. First in science fiction since 1926. And this is the June 26th thing. So they are referencing the first use of the term science fiction as opposed to science fiction. Great stuff. Look at that. Who's in it? Asimov, Del Rey. Okay. Lots of other figures who are not Golden Age, which is great news. Ellison, Benford. I do really like Gregory Benford, actually. He's one of the few hard SF writers I really like because he can write. You know, he can actually write. Robert F. Young, Chris Neville. I've become more interested in Malmsberg, Ted White. And there's the cover look of Amazing Stories from back in the day. Wells, Vernon, Poe. I think that says it all, doesn't it? Isn't that stunning? Absolutely gorgeous. Lovely. Illustrated. Yeah, it's really nice. I mean, I don't often do magazines, but I've decided if I can get them in really nice nick, because mostly, of course, they're in a state that I would. In 1976, I was 13, so that's 47 years old. I think you'll agree that's pretty stunning, isn't it? Look at this, beautiful, absolutely gorgeous. Then we move forward to really what Robert Silverberg said was the true golden age, which was the 1950s, and two magazines dominated the 50s. The actual golden age was over. Even though Astounding was still going, John W. Campbell still running that, there were two magazines which really sort of came forward and took things apart, and they were Galaxy and the magazine of fantasy and science fiction. These were the social science titles. These are the ones. And this is Galaxy. 23rd anniversary all-star issue, published by Tandem UK. Tandem, of course, was part of Star, W.H. Allen. And yeah, look at that, absolutely unbroken spine, lovely period ad on the back, a little bit of aging there, but we can live with that. Absolutely gorgeous. That yellow and blue really pops, doesn't it? Excellent. So what year is this? So wow, 23rd. So this is early 70s, and I don't want to bend the spine. We'll have a look at it at some point. 73, really nice. Look at that. 25p. Fantastic. These are actually the first magazines of this kind I've ever bought. I used to buy Interzone. I have issues of New Worlds, but in terms of the actual magazines, I've never bought them. I've looked at them. I've always avoided them. I know all about their history. I've read up on them. but I've never actually bought any. So these are my first ones. So I'm sort of busting my cherry on those. That's great. So that's Galaxy and Amazing. Yeah. Gosh, Lagan, Bradbury, Ellison, Sturgeon, Clark. The Theodore Sturgeon video recently was great because a lot of people disagreed with me. A lot agreed with me. The journey's still out really for me on Sturgeon. But it was a very civilized exchange. There was only one person who did that gainsaying thing of, I think you mean he's underrated. Yeah, well, you know, present an argument for something behind that. It's all very well and good making a statement, but, you know, back it up, you know. But it was great because people have been really civilized about it, you know. Gainsaying gets us nowhere. Argument, dialectic, you know, you sort of give some evidence and stuff. That's what's really about. So that's lovely. The other magazine of the 50s, which made the big impact, was of course the Magazine of Fantasy and Science Fiction, and I've got 2 issues here, and I think this is the earlier one, and this is a all British issue, and I bought it for that reason, because it's got a great War of the Worlds illustration on the cover. And when is this from? This is from the late 70s, and look at that: Aldous, Priest, Aikman, Cowper, Watson, Bulmer, Roberts and Brenner. 75p UK. Look at the spine on that. Not a ripple or a lean in sight. This is the standard, I think you'll agree. Absolutely gorgeous. Lovely. Interesting that Aikman's in there, isn't it? I guess that's the fantasy element. So, yeah, and this has got a very soft cover. Ariadne Potts by Keith Roberts, I know that story. The Watched by Chris Priest, yeah. All this, the novelettes. It's interesting the way they spelled novelettes there. Novelettes with a TS as opposed to a double TES, which I would say is the correct spelling. Short stories. And of course the lengths were determined by the people who gave the Hugo Awards for those. So there you go. Really, really nice. So I'll probably keep these bagged because these are really nice. These are just really for fun, as attractive things to have, and just to have a representation. April 78. Punk rock was gone. Post-punk was in. The month after Black and White, but the Stranglers was released. Yeah, it's all happening then. I was 15, almost. So was I 15? Yeah, 15. 15, wow. Good grief. Fantastic. And finally, one more. Another issue, slightly later. This is from November 1980. Contains an important novella for me, which is Harlan Ellison's All the Lies That Are My Life. And there's Harlan there, with Stonehenge behind it. And I really like that cover. Now that novella is in Shatterday. Shatterday, great collection, came out about probably round about that time, maybe a bit later. And Shatterday was published by Hutchinson in the UK. It was widely remaindered. And I bought mine remaindered for about £1. I still got it. It's pristine. Great collection. One of my favourite collections by Harlan. And All the Lies That My Life is a mainstream story about writers, which is really good. So there you go. Look at that. SF Book Club, 6 for $1 with membership. It's not like that anymore, is it? And so they're very, very slight covers. So yeah, so you have to be careful with those. So that's a bit of magazine action for you. So that's a pristine quality paperbacks, magazines, fantasy, horror, SF book haul for you. Hope you've enjoyed that. Sorry about the handheld camera, sorry about the glare. I'm sure you'll live with it. There'll be more book hauls coming. There's been a lot on the channel recently, and there's been less of the clickbaity top 10 things. There will be some of those because people love them, and I've got some themes I want to explore. I've got some reading to do, but I know you like to see some real high quality stuff. So there we are. This is Outlaw Bookseller signing out for now. Have a great day. Cheers.